Road Scholars Live, fresh brewed and air cooled with Cam Ingram. I'm your co-host, Ray Schaefer, the former GM of Brumos Porsche, racer and speaker, now flying the flag at Porsche Classic USA. My co-host is Cam Ingram. He's the owner of Road Scholars. He's a multiple Concours winning restoration expert, author, and speaker who this year is going to be driving up Pikes Peak for the first time. We're both two passionate Porsche people whose work requires a daily drive down deep tracks of Porsche history and heritage. And today that means we're talking with the youngest person ever to finish the Le Mans 24 hours. And of course, I'm talking about Gunnar, Jeannette. Cam, how excited are you?
I'm pumped. I mean, this guy is a living Renaissance man and so talented at everything he does. It makes me sick. So I can't wait to introduce the world to this guy, and his stories are going to be unbelievable.
No doubt. I mean, he starts racing at historic sports car racing at the age of 16. And by the age of 18, he's at the Le Mans 24 hours as his debut there. And he's born and raised with Porsche in his bloodlines. I mean, he's seemingly raced everything and with some very notable co-drivers nonetheless. Turns out he's also an avid extreme sports enthusiast who's got more than 1,500 skydives to his name.
Of course.
And yet his Instagram account simply states that he plays with cars and flies stuff. And Cam, we both know that Gunnar brings a great deal more than that to the fresh brewed and air-cooled table. So let's get to it.
Let's do it.
Well, Gunnar, welcome. It is great to have you here with Cam and I today. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here and looking forward to chatting with you guys.
Well, thank you so much. You know, Road and Track Magazine, right before Rennsport Reunion, the most recent one, did a story. And in the headline, they referred to your dad, our friend Kevin, as American motorsports royalty, stating that everyone from Paul Newman to AJ Foyt drove for this Porsche legend. And of course, you're the co-driver to many of those famous names. So we got to talk about, I believe, starting with your dad, because you basically were born into the racing idea. In fact, I know Gunnar Racing basically set up what you were going to pretty much do with your life, right?
Yeah. Funny story. So the first Gunnar in the family was actually a dog. So there was a dog before there was the business, then before me. But man, it was a good looking dog.
That's a good story. I don't think I was not aware of that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I never heard
a lot of people ask that. Well, were you before the business or was the business before you? And it's like, well, actually the dog was first.
It's a fair question. We love animals, so perfect. I'm glad you set the record straight on that one. So, yeah. But of course, your dad, Kevin Jeannette, has been crew chief and builder and restorer for Porsche racing cars going back into the 1970s. Time with the 917s, 934s, 935s, of course, 962, giving the 962 its first Daytona 24-hour win with chassis number 104 back in 1985. And of course, building some pretty cool cars along the lines of the G93 and the G99. Of course, not to mention the open top 962 known as the 966.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to elaborate on that a little bit, I mean, my entire life has just been around cool cars and, you know, growing up at the shop in the summertime, that's what we would do. You know, you just go in the museum and sit in a 908 or 962 and just, you know, play race car driver. And then when the actual races were going on, you know, we'd get to go to Daytona and Sebring growing up in West Palm Beach and just hang outside the fence, wishing that I was old enough to get into the hot pits. And then, you know, when I got to be, I think about 14, you know, you just sit on the pit cart and just go in and just hope that the Daytona security Gestapo didn't, you know, grab you off and throw you out.
So Gunnar, when did you know you wanted to be a race car driver? I mean, growing up in your father's shop and whatnot, when did it dawn on you that this was going to be something that was going to be a major part of your life?
It's funny because I never like really grew up wanting to be on the driving side of things. You know, I grew up around especially Derek Bell, Brian Redmond, John Paul Jr., you know, guys like those that drove for my dad. And you know, in those summer months, we always had a little 5 horsepower Briggs and Stratton go-kart, and, you do as many laps as you could around the parking lot, and then you go the other way. And then when that got boring, you'd wet it down and then, do that. But yeah, I never really did any racing. And the sort of carrot for my dad when I was 15 was that he had 4 of the form car Formula Vs, and they hadn't run in about a decade. And he said, hey, if you and one of your friends wants to get these things running, we can bring them out at the next play day out at Moroso, or PBIR now, and you can drive it. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's fun. So we spent a couple months going through these Formula Vs and, rebuilding the drum brakes and, the gearboxes and carburetors and all that stuff. And yeah, so that day driving those, and then Champion Porsche was up there also, and they brought a Boxster there, and it was when the Boxster was like brand new. And at the very end of the day, my dad came up to me and said, hey, do you want to, go for a ride in the 904 with me? And I said, no, why don't you go for a ride with me in the Boxster? So he rode right seat with me, and I showed that I had some natural ability, I guess, and that was kind of the start of it all.
Wow.
Yeah. Was there a formal from that point then, was there a formal training process where there was ever a conversation where your dad said, well, if you want to go racing, we need to get you through a Skip Barber or something like that? How did that all happen?
So pretty much right after that, it was, if you get straight A's on your next however many report cards, and I was a junior in high school at the time, I would get to go do a 3-day at Skip Barber. And so the first, 3 semesters of school got straight A's and got to go to Skippy school at Sebring. And then, that was kind of the carrot. And then, we were looking after quite a few different people's historic racing cars in, kind of, that's what I would consider sort of the heyday of HSR, in the club sport races with the 2 and 2.5 liter 911s. I mean, there'd be a grid of 70 cars at Daytona. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so he was able then to convince some of his customers, if you let my kid co-drive with you in the Enduro, I'm sure knock some money off of the bill. and so that's how it really started.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I remember those HSR days.
Those were the glory days. Gunnar, do you think that experience in the shop, working in the shop, kind of has helped you? Because I've been around you at the track, and I think you're different than some drivers in the sense that you have fundamental understanding of mechanics and car setup. Do you think that was something that aided you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say I'm at least a little bit mechanically inclined. Throughout the years, probably when I was about 10 or 11, summers were working in the shop, doing, the grunt work, the grinding rust off of everything, being inside of the car in a rotisserie, getting, shards of wire wheel coming out and getting stuck in your face. In the summer of South Florida, it's 100 degrees outside. And so, that is, I got to work on a lot of cool cars. But at the same time, it was at that point of, okay, yeah, this isn't really what I want to do with my life. But that being said, yes, I have and have to owe a lot of the overall, mechanical inclination to that kind of stuff. And before I was sort of on the path to then being a professional driver, I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. And so I actually started going to school as a mechanical engineering.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, I mean, at some point through all the driving, because as I understand the timeline, right? Because again, I remember this. Now I'm kind of showing my age here, because I remember, this HSR time period. Then we get into the early 2000s. We're talking about, high school to professional racing, where we've got maybe about a 2-year period in there where you make your debut at Le Mans at the age of 18,
Yeah,
making you youngest ever to finish the race.
yeah, it was actually more like 6 months. So I did my first race at Road Atlanta was the end of '99. It was like October. So we did that. And then Daytona HSR. And then, right from there, Michael Lauer wanted to get the new GT3R, the first water cooled, 911 race car, customer car. And so we got that. And then, essentially my fourth race was the 24 Hours of Daytona with, Michael and Michael Brockman and Paul Newman. So
That's
yeah,
wild.
it was a very accelerated learning curve to that point.
I remember watching that race thinking, and my dad and I were watching it on TV. I think that was when Speed Vision, right?
Yep.
And my dad was like, "Who's this kid in the car with Paul Newman? He's fast."
Yeah. And it was, I mean, Paul had been a family friend through racing for, numerous years. So, I knew him as the race car driver, not really the movie star. And of course I had seen a couple movies, but it wasn't like this Hollywood icon. It was just, oh yeah, well, that's Paul. I get to drive with him. But it was pretty neat because I was at the time the youngest person to ever do the race at, 17. And he was the oldest person to ever do the race at 75. And yeah, I mean, he was still super fast and competitive. And I mean, you could just, see the love that he had for driving and for motorsports.
Well, I just got to feel like, though, at this point, we got to somehow stop and say, get inside your head for a minute, because I mean, going from vintage racing into pro racing that quickly at that level with those type of co-drivers, I mean, how do you handle that? How did you handle that?
I honestly don't remember. I mean, I remember details about the event and that kind of thing, but it was a little bit overwhelming, but it wasn't really anything new for me because I had been going to Daytona basically every year since, I was 10, 11 years old. It was just, I was going over the pit wall and getting in the car instead of going over the pit wall and, wiping the windshield or, running tires or any of that kind of stuff. So it was just sort of a different role. And yeah, I mean, obviously getting out there and being in the lower class of car with, Ferrari 333s and Riley and Scotts and Delaras and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it was pretty awesome.
Now, do you have fond memories of that first water cooled GT3 R?
Not particularly from that race.
Have you driven one recently?
Yeah. So we still have the Eddie Van Halen car.
Oh, that's right.
And that's basically a 2002 car, but they weren't really that much different. Yeah, I mean, I really, really enjoyed driving those. In going up against the guys that came out of especially Carrera Cup and Super Cup, because at that time they had it was the Dick Barber team and then Alex Job, and it was, Dirk Mueller and Lucas Lohr and, all the young hotshot guys that have spent, multiple years banging on each other in the Cup Series and these things. And it was like, oh my gosh, just watching what they could do with the cars and how hard they drove them was really eye-opening because, this is like my 5th car race ever. Like I nowhere near that point. But yeah, and those cars especially, they sounded really, really good. And it was really the last normal H pattern 6-speed gearbox that you had to use a clutch in Porsche race cars. Because after that, they went to the sequential. and they just, they shifted really well and sounded great. And, on Daytona, how the sound reverberates around the banking and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's definitely some good memories.
Oh man, they're special cars. And you're right about that H-pattern gearbox. Was thrilled to have a chance to try your Brumo's Pink Sally car for the Rolex Heritage one year. And that was my first experience with it there. And boy, you're right about that sound. Amazing.
Yeah. With the mega.
Man, I have to say, though, I don't have a hard time relating to a lot of things, but this accelerated. I just marvel at that, going from what you started out to the level that you jumped into, and then handled it so beautifully. I think that's the other part, and I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around.
Well, Ray, I'm going to be fair to Gunnar because we went to mutual friends day and Kelly Slater Surf Ranch, and Gunnar, who's maybe surfed once in his life, I don't even remember the circumstances, but he hasn't spent much time in the water. By the third time, he's already catching tubes. I was like, this is unbelievable. I was like, he's just a natural phenomenon. So I can attest to his natural athleticism.
All right. Now I can understand.
I try to listen and process and, do what I'm told. And so it's really just being around people that and trust and, having the ability to apply what they're telling you. And, the first time that we all did Daytona, our sister car was Emka with Steve O'Rourke. And, Derek Bell and Tim Sugden and those guys are driving that car. So, you want to talk about having a great person to learn how to do a 24-hour race. It's like, I'm listening to Derek Bell. It really doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Not at all. So we go from your first Le Mans race, being the youngest ever to finish that, to 2003, I believe it was, when you were actually the first non-Audi finisher in that amazing Panos Roadster. I remember those front engine cars really well because we were in the support series at the time, and man, those things were thunderous. What were they like to drive?
It was pretty fantastic. And, I had sort of through the historic racing stuff, I had gotten to drive a lot of GTP and Group C cars, obviously 962s, Spices, the Intrepid. I got to do about half a year racing the Intrepid GTP car, which was a total, just absolute monster. And so honestly, to step from those cars to the Panos, the speed differential really wasn't that big. They kind of just did it in a different way because they weren't tunnel cars. It was a flat bottom, with a diffuser and a big splitter on it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, to have that opportunity at 19, moving away from home and essentially getting my first real gig and a real paycheck driving race cars and in an LMP1 team and scenario with Don and having co-drivers like David Brabham and Jan Magnussen, Bill Oberlin, Brian Herta. Yeah, I mean, it was a great environment for learning, and yeah, it was a ton of fun. And the Panos on its day was a really, really good competitive race car. The window in which it sort of worked was a lot smaller than the Audi. And I mean, you look at Audi and obviously Yost and the amount of effort that they put into that program and budget. And then, you watch a 3-minute gearbox change happen at Le Mans. And it was funny. Years later, I've now gotten to drive a couple of the R8s. And the very first lap out of the pits, it's like, oh, this is why. Like, I know now why, we basically couldn't compete unless Audi shot themselves in the foot because the car is just so good. But the Panos, especially, what they were able to do in beating Audi on multiple occasions, and just especially at Le Mans, the fanfare. All of the Danish guys, every time the car would go by on the front straight, there'd be people basically doing the wave and, air horns going off and all sorts of stuff through the whole 24 hours. And so the following that car had was really, really special. And I mean, the sound it made was unlike anything else. And it sounded so good. And, you felt it when it went by. It wasn't just a sound.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's killer. That is so killer. I love the detail about the Danish fans going crazy. That's great.
Yeah. In that actual race, we had been back and forth both with the Courage of Jean-Marc Gunnar, who's sort of he's a French guy, so obviously in Le Mans he's kind of a big deal, and the Dome of Lammers, and so we knew it was going to be tight sort of there at the end, and we had like just an absolutely perfect race. The car ran faultlessly. We really didn't have to do anything to it for the whole 24 hours. And like I was kind of working out the stints, in the mornings, like, okay, I just got out. Ollie's going to be in for a double. Max is going to be in for a double. And like, I was like, oh, that means I'm going to be the one that finishes. Do I really want that weight on my shoulders? And so I went and talked to our engineer and I said, look, if you want to put me in, I'm good. I want to do it. And he said, yeah, okay. We have the faith in you that you can do it. And so, the whole last hour of the stint, we're sort of back and forth with Gunnar in the garage for, first non-Audi. And I remember going down the front straight, and there's a couple big screens sort of around the track, and, grabbing gears, and I look up at the big screen and it's me. I'm like, oh, cool. We're on TV. Don't screw it up because everybody's watching.
This is priceless.
But yeah, to cross the line and have the best ever finish for Panos at Le Mans, and with that kind of finish, because Bentley won that year. It was Bentley, Audi, us, and the Bentley was basically just an Audi. So yeah, that was definitely one of my fondest moments in motorsport.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Well, we get to. I want to say most recently here in Atlanta, you took home a class win at the Petit Le Mans. And how does that event? Of course, not as long and all that, but how do you rate or compare the competitiveness of the Petit Le Mans, a track like Road Atlanta, to the 24 Hours of Le Mans?
I would say in a lot of regard, Petit is harder. At Le Mans in the 24 hours, now they're starting, I think they're starting like 60 or 61 cars maybe, but it's an 8.5 mile long track, right? With lots of straightaways. So the racing is still fierce and very good, but there's a lot of places to pass. And a place like Road Atlanta is much more difficult having 50 cars out there with the speed differentials. Road Atlanta at night after a race has been going on for 9 hours, you're turning into the S's, and even a GT car now is just about flat going down into the S's in 4th, 5th gear. Yeah. And it's just, that particular turn in, if you're off by, milliseconds, you're either going to be too early and pop the curb or too late and really have a bad day because you're going off the track. And then, throw in multiple classes and all that kind of stuff. I just find, Atlanta super challenging for Petit, but also extremely, because the track is just, it's so cool in the first place. And then, you throw in an endurance race, and especially, racing at night there, and the fact that the season normally finishes there. And so the stakes are even higher.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's killer. So tell us a little bit about WeatherTech. Where are you talking from today?
I am talking from my living room in wonderful Downers Grove, Illinois.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
yeah. So yeah, I through through historic racing and current racing, I knew Cooper, but we never really hung out much or worked together or anything. And and then through the marvel of the driver ranking system, I became a silver. And a couple months before, David McNeil had got a couple of the RS fighters from Christian Zugel that we looked after, and so we sort of did day at the track, showing them the cars and just basic how to drive them, that kind of stuff. And so just kind of reached out to him at that point and ended up getting a drive for him, first with Alex Job Racing in the Porsche, and then with Riley in the Mercedes, and then Scuderia Corsa and the Ferrari stuff. And then got to drive a bunch of historic cars and go over and do the Tour Auto and the RSR a couple times, which Cooper and I won overall one year, which was really cool. And then yeah, sort of out of the blue, David offered me a position inside of the company, and I thought about it for about 3 hours and thought I would be pretty stupid to turn it down. So yeah, I have definitely shifted gears a little bit in my overall life, and having the first ever real job.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so I look after a bunch of different programs, and David's been very gracious in that I still am able to go out and do racing events, and it's good for them as well, because I'm still involved to a certain extent with stuff that they're doing. We were planning on doing Classic Le Mans this year, but it's gotten pushed again for the second year in a row. So maybe we'll do it in 2022. But yeah, and it's a really cool company to be a part of, and just David's passion for the auto industry and racing, and then made in the USA, just as a company ethos. I'm super stoked to get to be a part of it.
So Gunnar, can you back up a little bit and talk about, because that's something not to blemish, to skirt over the win at Tour de Auto. Can you kind of, for our audience who not aware of how intense that race is, and it's like a real race, it's supposed to be a vintage rally, but could you elaborate a little bit that with Cooper
Yeah, absolutely.
and the RSR?
So I had heard of Tour Auto basically just through David and our now president at WeatherTech, Pat Womack, who's he races in SCCA and historics and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And they had gone over and done it a couple of years prior. And so basically the Tour Auto is what the Tour de France was back in the 50s, 60s, early 70s. Not the bicycle race. There was an auto race that was also called the Tour de France. But it's a really neat format in that it's now it's a 5-day event. The cars have to be registered on the road, which, back then sort of everything was. But the start is always at the Grand Palais in Paris. And then the route changes every year, and they have like 6 or 7 routes that they use. But you'll leave. They give you, basically a rally book of, here are the checkpoints that you have to go through. After, a certain amount of kilometers, you go through, you get a stamp on your thing that proves you were there. And then you rock up either to a racetrack or a special stage. And the special stages, there's more of them, but it's essentially a closed tarmac rally. So you have no idea of what the route is. Like, you literally show up and they give you pace notes that are the crappiest pace notes ever. They'll be like a kilometer in between notes, and you've done like 8 turns. So you basically can't even trust the notes that they've given you. And you're in a line, and when it's your turn, you've got helmets in the back that you've been carrying around with you everywhere. You throw the helmet on, and you basically go as fast as you can, or with whatever margin you want. And these stages are awesome. And for instance, the very last one that we did in the year that we won was the Col de Turini, which is a famous stage in the Monte Carlo Rally. And they still use it.
Yeah.
So you do that, hopefully make it in one piece. A lot of times you'll pass, Cobras or Jaguar E-types or whatever, basically slid over in a ditch. And maybe if it's bad enough, there's a guy waving a yellow flag, but likely not. So you finish that, and then you have to get to your next checkpoint, and so on and so on. And then the races, you'll rock up to a racetrack, wait for everybody in your group to show up, and then they give you 10 minutes of practice. You stop there, and then go grid, like green flag. Wow. And the race is like, 15 minutes, something like that. And it's accrued total time. So your finishing position, like your actual finishing position in the race doesn't matter. It's your time in the race.
Wow.
And so basically 5 days of that through, really cool old historic towns, through the Alps, through the Pyrenees, and the towns that you go through, because the route has been published, you'll have all these people on the side of the road, like just camping out and cheering as the cars go by and waving their favorite manufacturer flags and just that sort of thing. And it is definitely one of the coolest experiences that I've ever had in a race car. Wow. And it's one of those things where, basically every day you're in the car from 8 to 12 hours. We did it in a 1974 RSR, which is, as far as it goes, pretty comfortable. I mean, there's people that do it in legit GT40s. I'll never forget coming up to a toll booth, and there's a GT40 in front of us, and watching the guy like try to open up the door and like reach his arm out the window to throw in a couple of euros was pretty hysterical. And it's ordinarily in April, so the weather's normally like a total crapshoot. And yeah, I would highly suggest to anybody with a cool, historically significant car that just wants to have a really interesting experience to look at the Tour Auto. And the cool thing is too, is that, so there's two classes. There's a competition class, and then there's also a regularity class. So the regularity class, you just have to like basically, commit the time that you're going to do the stage or the laps in, and then you have to try to get as close as possible to that time.
Oh,
so you don't, cool. So you don't have to, be driving flat out or any of that kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah. Super special experience.
Man, what a description. I mean, as you said, this is a piece done just like it was back in the day. And Cam and I have talked before. We talked to Brian Redmond. We talked about the Targa Florio 1970. We talked about all these great events. And then, of course, we always say, don't just go meet your heroes, get to know your heroes. And it sounds like the Tour Auto is really a way to do that from an event and a machine standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole Peter Auto organization, they do a really good job putting it on and getting people involved and that sort of thing. It's one of the deals where when it's immediately over, you're like, whew, gosh, I really don't, I don't care if I ever do that again. And then, a couple of weeks goes by and you're like, oh man, that was awesome. We got to sign up again for next year. You forget all the bad memories, and all of the good memories just become even more fun.
I'm loving this interview because every time you get really into a good point in one of your stories, the stormtrooper and big wheels pops up right behind you. And it's just like, it's like priceless.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, it's obvious to me from listening to you describe your experience in your career so far that you're a fast study, you're a quick learner, and you apply what you see when you take the right things and apply all that. So I'm curious, when you are approaching working with your co-drivers, you've coached some folks that we know, some friends, and you've done well with that. How do you lift others to a higher performance level to the point where, recently you ran HR1, your dad and your team did a beautiful job of running the 962 HR1 with previous Daytona IMSA history winning there to a classic 24 alongside what I call Rodrigo and the Bells.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like a band.
Yeah, I like that.
In the Bills. That is great, Ray. That is really good.
Yeah.
So how do you coach when you've got Derek Bell there, and then you've got this massive experience yourself, and you're working with a co-driver who doesn't have all the experience? What's the best way for you to coach?
Well, first of all, I want to be totally clear in that I was definitely not coaching Derek or Justin Bell. They have way more experience than I do, and I was just hoping to learn as much from them as possible. But yeah, on the other side, it's like, a guy like Rodrigo, he's been an enthusiast for a long time and has raced in lower categories and that sort of thing. And so first off, it's really just figuring out overall expectations and goals, because if somebody just wants to go out there and be safe and have a good time and enjoy the car, then obviously it's going to be a different program than somebody that goes, I want to get to Le Mans. I want to be the fastest bronze driver possible. And, then it's like, okay, you're going to basically push them to their limit. And a lot of times getting them over their limit to see what they can, achieve and deal with and how they react. Because, if you want to be serious about this sport, one, I mean, it's a huge amount of effort that you have to put forth. And then secondly, you just have to figure out the best method for teaching, because everybody's a bit different with that regard, and so it's really just finding what works with the people in order to get the knowledge across of not necessarily how to do something, although that is important, but why.
Yeah.
So many people, include the why, and the why is a lot of times even more important than just the mechanics of do this way. And so, yeah, I mean, that's, I try to, get as deep into that as possible. And then, talking about it on a way more, deeper level, the whole, conscious thinking mind versus subconscious thinking, talking about being in the zone of a sport where stuff happens naturally. That is the point where you're operating at your highest level, because you don't have to think about it. It's just instinct at that point. And so that is absolutely the hardest part with working with different people, is trying to figure out how to get them to the point where they can sort of tap into that. And, that's just a lot of experience and work.
You've got to do the work, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and in that regard, driving modern cars is way easier than driving old cars, because with a car with ABS, you just stomp on the brake pedal, and as long as you haven't gone too deep, like, the thing's gonna figure it out, and then you bang the downshift paddle a couple times, and there's a lot less art to driving and endurance racing now. The overall requirements are different, because a lot of the modern endurance races are just sprint races where you can't have a mistake.
Yeah. I think this brings us to a perfect point too, because you are uniquely qualified and experienced to make those statements. And I think what maybe a lot of folks don't know is a special friendship that you and your family has with Miles Collier and the Revs Institute has really given an opportunity to for you to exercise some of the icons of racing's past. And these statements that you're making about the differences of what endurance racers of the 50s and 60s, 70s experience versus today, I just love that you're in this position to really speak to that. Can you talk a little bit about what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting at the Road Scholar Invitational a couple of weeks ago. Hurley was sat there, and I sat down with Hurley after getting to drive one of the cars that he raced back in the day, and we chatted about that, because obviously he's still involved with Porsche and the Young Driver program, and just obviously he has a way better perspective on it than I do in the generations and how things have changed. But yeah, I mean, there are the first ride I ever had in a race car was the 908 Longtail that I've gotten to race at Laguna, and just recently was driving in Atlanta, and so yeah, I mean, I've for a good time period grown up around the Collier cars, and so now it's really come full circle with being trusted to drive their incredible collection, and a huge amount of gratitude to Miles Collier and Scott George and Bill Bloom and everybody there for giving me the trust to take out a Martini 917 that's worth how many millions of dollars and is still basically original from its last race at Spa in 1971. Like, it's a pretty special thing for somebody that's grown up around Porsche race cars.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, just the overall character and differences between all of the different Porsche models and stuff throughout the years. If I could choose a generation to be a race car driver in, it wouldn't be this generation.
That's really a poignant statement. I mean, I think there's no greater honor in the world to see that the trust that Mr. Collier has in you to drive those cars, whether it's at Laguna, at Rennsport, or on these exposition laps. It's just amazing. But I think I said to you, in the excitement of seeing you and then riding with you in the RS61, I don't know if there's anyone in the world right now, Gunnar, that can drive these cars not just to the efficiency level, but as fast as you can on a safe level. But I was just so blown away riding with you with that flat 8 in the RS61 of your car control. I mean, I've had some really unique experiences on the racetrack, but that by far was the pinnacle of a really cool thing at riding with you in that car.
Oh, well, thanks, Cam. I really appreciate that. And you being involved in what you do and all the cars that you guys look after, I mean, that really means a lot to me too. And I'm really glad that, was able to share that experience, because yeah, it is something that is, very, very special. And the real cool thing about the Revs Institute and foundation collection, everything, is that they want to see the cars used. That is what the cars were built for. And okay, yeah, we don't drive them necessarily as hard as they were back in the day, but try to get relatively close to that. And everybody involved with that does such a good job of maintaining as much of the originality of the cars as possible, while keeping them at a level that they are safe to be driven at 9/10 on a racetrack. Every time I get into one of those cars that were notoriously bad in the day, I have zero concern for or zero worry that something is going to happen because the cars haven't been looked after. And I can't say enough about those guys and the amount of trust that I put into them as well.
I
But
think what the Revs Institute, we're so honored to partner with them on these events, whether it's the 4Cam Jam or the RS Invitational. But again, his philosophy, Mr. Collier's philosophy of keeping these cars as movement statements that move and seeing them in action is just remarkable. We are so lucky as a Porsche community to reap the benefits of his philosophy and action of letting you drive these things around the track. It's nothing short of amazing.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, they're talking about Rennsport and those types of events, to be in the 908 Flunder and, sitting on the grid, waiting, and you look to your right and there's a Gulf 917 that, won Daytona in 1970, and you look to your left and Chris McAllister's and another guy, Gulf 917 that basically hasn't been restored. And, I'm sitting there, holding the original steering wheel that Sifford and Redmond used to, win Watkins Glen and that kind of stuff. And I mean, I'm not too proud to say it. Like there have been moments sitting in their cars where like, I am so overcome with emotion and just how cool that is. Every time like that, I have to just pinch myself.
On that note, why don't you talk a little bit about that Rennsport race? Because that was one of the best races I've ever seen.
Yeah. You're probably talking about the longtail one. Yeah. So that was, guess what? That was Rennsport 5. That was 2 Rennsports ago.
Yeah, 2 Rennsports ago.
But yeah, I mean, a 908 longtail against 3 Gulf 917s and, multiple position swaps. And I mean, we're so lucky now to be in an age where, really GoPro age and the cameras are so good that we're able to have, multiple angles of this stuff going on. And okay, yeah, it's not quite as cinematic as, a Le Mans thing, having a huge camera rig or any of that kind of stuff. But it's still pretty amazing. And yeah, I mean, I think I've, told both of you guys, not on this, but 917s are cool and they're obviously very special, but I am a 908 guy. Like the 908 for me is just the perfect balance of grip and power and sound and yeah. So to be able to take a 908 and, sort of like taking a knife to a gunfight with the 917s and to be able to race with those guys is definitely yeah, I mean it's one of the most memorable moments in my racing career.
Yeah, that was such a badass race.
We had the opportunity at the RS Invitational recently to watch Patrick Long, another season 1 guest from Fresh Brewed and Air Cooled, try that 908 longtail. And I've got a great shot of he's getting in the car for the first time and you're explaining things to him. Again, when someone like Pat gets in the car, what are you telling him? What does he need to know?
Well, Pat is obviously a little bit different because he's, a bit like me in that he's been in the Porsche family for long enough that he's gotten to experience a lot of their, historically significant cars. So, there's zero concern in giving something to Pat and worrying, okay, well, yeah, is it going to come back the same way that it left? But the long tail and how it was there just, had little nuances and just talking about, shift patterns and all that kind of stuff. And, he's driven enough, 917s and other things like that it's similar enough that you have a pretty good general idea of what the car is going to be like. And so I really didn't need to tell Pat that much. And I'm glad he got to experience it because, yeah, it's just, they're such special cars and from a look standpoint and a sound standpoint, I mean, it's absolutely one of my favorite Porsches of all time.
That Jeff was I didn't know this, but that is his favorite Porsche in the world is the Longtail, the 908, and seeing that emotion. And we got a pretty exciting video we're gonna drop pretty soon of the whole event, but seeing that thing in motion, even amongst the Martini 917 and the 917 PA, to me, I agree with you. The 908 is the star of the show for so many reasons.
Yeah. And to think of Redmond and Siffert driving that at Spa in 1969, and old Spa, not new. And Spa now, I wouldn't say is a numb, dull modern racetrack, but back then it was even more nuts. And they basically did average lap speeds there over 150 miles an hour. Like, crazy. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy to think about.
Yeah, exactly.
Gosh, I mean, I could just sit here, and I'm afraid we're going to have to do multiple episodes, because I could just sit here and go through the list of numbers that I'm curious about. We're talking about the 908, but obviously there's 904, there's 906, there's 962. Then of course we have the ones without the letters, like RS Spider and RSK. I mean, there's so much to talk about. And again, you're in a spot where you can tell us just from an angle that so few people get a chance to experience. Man, I want to be you when I grow up.
So I was actually thinking of it before the interview, in just that you guys might ask me the cars that I drove. And
for sure,
it's honestly easier to say the ones that I haven't driven. And that is, I haven't driven a 909 Berg Spider. I haven't driven a 917 Turbo. I haven't driven a 936. I haven't driven the 961, the 959 race car. And I haven't driven the 919.
Wow. Well, that's such a long list, Gunnar. Jeez.
Yeah, no, but I'm sure there's probably a couple others that I'm missing in all of that.
But no, I'm just excited because now we finally have something in common when it comes to
Yeah, which one of those on the list are you gunning to literally drive? Pardon the pun, but which one are you gunning to drive?
To me, I think driving a 917 Turbo would be top of the list. I mean, obviously a 919, given the opportunity to do that, would just be, so far above anything else that I've ever driven before. But the 917 Turbo, is right up there. Rob Kaufman did say that at some point he will offer, but that offer hasn't happened yet. And every time I see him, I remind him about it.
So we might have to get him. I did invite him to the RS Invitational, so maybe he'll make the next one because he had a schedule conflict.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, that about covers my question I had for, after everything you've done, what's next on your to-do list? But I think that's a good answer right there.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, obviously, we're in the coming out stages of the pandemic, and events will happen again, hopefully. So yeah, looking forward to going to Laguna again for historics, hopefully this year. There's a good likelihood that we'll be doing the Sonoma Speed Festival thing again.
Awesome.
So yeah, and it's always neat to get to experience different parts of motorsports history.
Well, Gunnar, I can't thank you enough, because I consider you and your family part of Porsche royalty here in the United States. And thank you so much for your time today. Your insights are unbelievable. I think we definitely need a second episode, because you have so many experiences that we could talk for hours or listen to you for hours.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And have to say, I'm a big fan of the show and think what you guys are doing is awesome. So please keep it up.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that endorsement. Thanks for watching. We appreciate that very much. Where can folks stay up to date on all your latest adventures? Where are you most active, and where can folks learn more about you?
Yeah, so I am in the process of being better with putting things up on a YouTube channel. Yes. So Right now, I probably only have about like 8 different videos up there, but it's things like driving an Interscope K3 at night at Le Mans and that kind of stuff. So
Yes, please.
if people are really into this type of thing, find my YouTube channel, and I am definitely going to be putting some more effort into getting content up there that I think and hope that that everybody involved and watching the show will enjoy.
All of our viewers need to go and watch the lap in the R61 with your GoPro on the 360
Oh yeah.
swivel. That is one of the most intense rides you can have. You'll thank us in
Yeah.
the morning when you watch it.
Yeah.
That is very cool. That is very cool. Well, thank you, Gunnar, for sharing a fresh brewed cup with us today. As we talked from your unique Porsche perspective, it's incredible conversation. We appreciate your insights so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you somewhere soon.
Cheers. Thanks, Gunnar.
Take care, Gunnar.
Bye, guys.
Well, Ray, what did you think of that? Because that was, to me, that was an hour that went by in 10 minutes. And Gunnar is such a unique position to tell these stories in the modern era because of all his experiences, again, in all these different cars, from his racing career to the vintage Porsche he's raced with his father, through the Revs Institute. And again, from Rennsport to exposition laps all over the world. It's just unbelievable what he's been able to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, he really is as a treasure to our community because he's so uniquely positioned to speak about the machines, and he's got such respect for the people who made it happen. He knows a lot of them, or knew a lot of them if they're no longer with us. I mean, again, there's just such an amount of respect there that anybody that talks to him for any length of time, and you could hear it here in the interview, he's just so authentic in that respect. And I just love that about him. And I could listen to him for hours. I mean, I want to dive into every single type of race car from, 550 all the way up and just talk about it. And it's great news because that means we're just going to have to come back and do that for future episodes.
I think we need to have him on the show and talk about some of our favorite, I think his insights, just his quick synopsis of Spa in the day in 69. And, I think we could pick some favorite races that of cars he's raced, and his ability to really describe what it's like to drive that car and compare juxtaposition to this races would be fascinating.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I know both his mother and his father, and I know they're super proud of him, but I mean, you can't not be proud of him if you're a Porsche person and you hear him speak so eloquently about these topics. So a lot like you, Cam. So
he's Porsche royalty. I'm just the guy. I'm one of the grunts that does the work.
Man, I'll tell you what, Porsche royalty, no doubt about it. What a thrill. What a thrill. Well, thank you all. We hope you all enjoyed that as much as we did. We appreciate you tuning into Fresh Brewed and Air Cooled with Gunnar Racing's Gunnar Jeannette. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share our video and podcast. And of course, keep driving, enjoying, and sharing your classic Porsche passion. And don't just go out and meet your heroes. We encourage you to get to know your heroes. Cam, with great thanks from your friends at Porsche Classic, I say so long for now.
Ray, from everyone at Road Scholars, thank you, everyone. Be safe. Take care.